Ni hao to y'all. I'm back, Sohan, for season 3 of Gong Fu Tea Cha. Today we're going to talk about chA, the chi of tea. This is a topic that a lot of y'all have wanted me to talk about, and I have talked about it some, but not on this show. So here we go. What is chA? Well, let's break it down. Cha means tea. Qi means breath, is the most essential thing that qi means. You probably have heard the word qi used in American English many times because now that word has kind of found its way into the English lexicon. But in Chinese, it means breath. It also means a lot of other things. It has been described as the essential texture of things, which I think is a great description. But we talk about it when we talk about Chinese medicine, qi in different organs, the flow of qi through your body. We talk about it in Chinese martial arts. When you are practicing Chinese martial arts, you are concerned with the flow of qi as well. We talk about it in Chinese cuisine. Certain foods are considered hot or cold in Chinese food culture. For example, something could be served at room temperature or even refrigerated and still be a hot food. It's not saying that it raises your temperature. It's saying the qi is hot. So in the context of tea, so cha, qi, tea, qi, breath, tea breath, what is qi in the context of Gong Fu Cha in Chinese tea culture? Well, I like to describe it as simply as possible by saying it's the way that tea makes you feel when you drink it. And that's kind of, I also talk about this when I'm answering the question, what makes a tea good? People ask me this a lot. They're like, well, how do I know a good tea? When I usually say something like, you know it's good because you like drinking it. But what I'm really saying is that the aspects of the tea that are good go beyond the taste and the smell. Actually, the taste and the smell are the most superficial aspects of the tea. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. They're important, but they're not as important as the qi of the tea, which is the way that it makes you feel, the vibe that you get from it. I'm drinking a tea here called Silver Needle to kind of typify what I'm saying and represent what I'm saying, because Silver Needle is a very light tea. You'll see when I make it, it's almost as clear as water. And the flavor is light, the color is light, the fragrance is light. But if it's good, it has really good qi. And actually a lot of the really higher end, more valued Chinese teas, higher grades, are this way. They go from being very robust and flavorful in the lower grades to being very light and subtle in the higher grades. And what's really going on when people are confused by this, like it's more expensive, it should be stronger. What's happening is that the flavor and the fragrance become more subtle, but the qi stands out more and becomes more pronounced. And so what is qi? It's the way the tea makes you feel. It is essential to the value of tea. When a tea is expensive or valuable, more expensive or valuable than another tea, it's generally not just because, again, of the taste and smell, but because that qi is better. This is why we like Gu Shu Cha, ancient tree tea. So I'm gonna make some of this Silver Needle here. Whew, I've been talking a lot today, so I definitely need this tea for my throat. Thank you, Moncho, for letting me use your teapot. So when I serve a tea like this, the thing that I'm looking for is the way that I feel when I drink it. It's the way that I feel when I smell the hot leaves. And a Western audience, very often when I'm presenting this to a Western audience, usually will respond, oh, so it's a caffeine high. When I talk about the qi of tea, or when I use the term cha zui, tea drunk, people say, oh, I'm tea drunk. And they're like, what does that mean? Does it mean that you've got a caffeine buzz? It's like when you have a lot of coffee. Well, I say no, it's not exactly that. There's a tendency for Westerners to think very scientifically, materialistically, oh, it's a drug. When you take something and then you feel something, it's because there's drugs in it. And that's what you're feeling. And I don't think that's what chA is, and I'll explain in more detail why that is in a minute. But first, let's talk about the drugs in tea, because there are chemicals in tea that are psychoactive chemicals, and caffeine is just one of them. So, caffeine is the most familiar. It's a stimulant. Caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. So adenosine is a chemical that builds up in your bloodstream as you are awake. And when it circulates up to your brain, you've got receptors that will tell you that you have a lot of adenosine in your blood, and it'll make you feel sleepy, because that's what you want to feel. Your body wants you to feel when you've been awake for a long time, because you need to sleep. So fatigue is not just running out of energy. It's actually this adaptive response that we've evolved over millions of years that says, oh, it's time to lay down and rest. What caffeine does is that it kind of looks like adenosine. It resembles adenosine and binds to the same binding sites on those receptors that adenosine does, and keeps the adenosine from binding. So without getting too technical, it doesn't make you feel like you have energy. It just shuts off your fatigue response. That's what caffeine does. That's the most familiar, but by no means the only or even the most prominent chemical in the psychoactive profile of tea. Then you have L-theanine. This is an amino acid. Number 2, L-theanine is an amino acid. It is named after tea. When you have chA in the name of a chemical, it's usually something that was first isolated from tea and named after tea. L-theanine helps you to feel calm because it's a GABA agonist. And so it kind of balances out the effect, the stimulant effect of the caffeine. And it's also been shown to induce the formation of alpha waves in your brain when you take it. This is in peer-reviewed studies. And alpha wave formation is what happens when you start meditating. Your brain waves are becoming organized. That's L-theanine. Number 2. Number 3 is theobromine. This is one of the chemicals that's in cacao. It's named after cacao. It's what makes you feel good, euphoric when you eat chocolate or drink chocolate. It's why we give people chocolate on Valentine's Day. And then lastly, you've got EGCG, epigallocatechin 3 gallate. This is one of the polyphenols in tea that are super famous. If you go and you dig into the studies where they say, oh, green tea prevents heart disease, green tea prevents cancer, a lot of the research is actually pointing at this one particular catechin, EGCG. It also is a GABA agonist, and it is anxiolytic, as in it reduces anxiety. It's anti-anxiety. And so the chemicals in tea, some of the many chemicals in tea, 4 of the ones that I'm talking about today, caffeine, L-theanine, theobromine, and EGCG, produce a net effect that is stimulating, focusing, euphoric, and calming. And that's the drug effect of tea. And incidentally, the chA of tea does feel a lot like that. Here's why I don't think that the chA is just the drug effect, because I can feel, and other people I know, and I've served tea to thousands of people at this point, and a lot of them will observe this without knowing anything about chA or being prompted by me. Myself and other people can feel the chA of tea as soon as they taste the tea, they take a sip, and just feeling it touch my lips, sometimes I can feel it. And sometimes I can feel it just smelling the hot, wet leaves, and I can feel something in my body. I feel my shoulders relax. I feel myself sit up straight. Even if I'm not expecting anything, I can be mid-sentence and just passively, smell the tea or sip the tea, and then it'll shut me up to the point where I actually interrupt what I'm doing, because I'm like, oh, I can feel it in my body. And other people do too. So what that tells me is that it can't just be the drugs, because drugs in your body, if I was to, for example, take an aspirin, before I felt the drug, I would have to swallow the aspirin. It would be absorbed into my digestive system and into my bloodstream from my digestive system. And then it would circulate up to my brain, cross my blood-brain barrier, and then I would feel it, right? So if I take a shot of vodka, for example, I don't feel it right away. It takes about 15 minutes. That's a problem for a lot of circumstances. But with tea, we can feel it right away. So what we're feeling right away certainly is not the drugs. It couldn't be. It doesn't make biological sense for that to be the case. So what is it? I don't know. I don't think anybody does. There is no scientific definition for what chA is, but I have a hypothesis. It's not entirely my own. But this is something I think about all the time, because it's this central aspect of Chinese tea culture. And so I do think about it a lot, and I've been thinking about it a lot for the past 20 years. And so my thoughts are that people often describe chA as energy. However, it is much more, to me, like information, because you can't measure chA, but you can measure energy. If qi was energy, then you could measure the change in temperature because of the movement of it, but we can't. So I think of qi more as information because it makes me feel a particular kind of way. You can think of a drug also as being like information. It tells your body to do something. And so what is the mechanism by which this information gets from the tea to me? I like the theory put forth by Masaru Emoto, who was a Japanese writer who wrote a book called The Hidden Messages in Water. And his work, I will preface this by saying his work was not conducted in a scientific way, but I agree with his conclusions, which are that he believes that because water is polar, water molecules have a front and a back. And so they can therefore have a structure or an orientation. For example, all the water molecules in this sample could be pointing up, or they could be pointing down, or they could be going like this, or they could be a spiral, or whatever. And his hypothesis was that this structure could be imaged by freezing the water, supercooling the water, and then instantaneously freezing it. And he would do experiments where he would have a piece of paper stuck to a jar of water that says, I love you, and then one that says, I hate you. And then he would supercool them and freeze them, and then examine the ice crystals in these two samples. And he would say, oh, look at the ice crystals in the I love you sample, these beautiful snowflakey symmetrical crystals. Look at the crystals in the I hate you sample. They're these globular, amorphous, oozy crystals. And he'd say, well, this is because the water holds that intention. The intention, the information is stored in the water in the form of the structure of those water molecules with respect to each other. Why wasn't this scientific? Because he didn't give us any kind of standards by which he was evaluating the shapes of the crystals. There was no like, these are the things I'm looking for, I'm going to quantify them. He didn't give us standard deviations. It wasn't like I did a transect of 100 sample, 100 slides from this sample, and the standard deviation using these metrics from this ideal form was this much compared to this much. None of that stuff, that good, rigorous science stuff was there. But like I said, scientific or not, I agree with his conclusions, or I think it's a compelling hypothesis. And for me, it really goes a long way to explaining the way that I think about qi, which is information from the plant expressed through the structure of the water and then taken into our bodies, and where that structure, that pattern then propagates through our bodies and we feel it in us. An example I like to use when talking about this, it's a little abstruse, but bear with me, it's a kind of abstruse concept. Imagine you've got a room full of magnets and they're all sitting face down and they're like this far away from each other. They're not sticking together. And then you take a magnet and you throw it right in the middle of the room. And then all the magnets go start sticking together like a domino effect, just spreading out and there's clumping all together, flipping over and clumping together. I think that it's something like that. When I take a cup of tea, there's this structure, this qi, this information. It's stored in the electromagnetic relationship of water molecules to each other. It's not a chemical that needs to hit a receptor in my brain. It's a pattern in the water. And as the water gets close to me, it's like those magnets. That pattern propagates through the water molecules in my body, of which there are many. And so that is my hypothesis with respect to tea, specifically of what qi is. Again, I'm not saying this is true. Take it with a grain of salt. This is the way that I like to kind of imagine it and think about it. So where does qi come from? If that's what it is, where does it come from? Well, obviously it comes from the tea, but how does it get into the tea? Where did the tea get its qi? Where did the plant get its qi? And I describe this as being the 5 P's. There's the plant itself, there's the place, there's the people who grow and pick it, there's the process, how it's processed, and then there's the pour. Hold on, the pour. There we go. That's the way to do it. And the first one, the plant, obviously is the plant itself, the identity of the plant. Is it young? Is it old? Is it big? Is it small? Is it a pu'er plant, or is it some highly derived cloned cultivar of oolong or something else? Is it the mother plant? Is it 3 generations down cloned off of the mother plant? All of those things are going to come to bear. Is it purple? And not just the plant. It's not like most teas aren't made of just one plant. The cumulative effect, the cumulative personality and character of all the plants that make up this particular pot of tea. So the second one is the place. That's what in the French they'll say the terroir of a wine when they're talking about a wine, and that refers to the soil, the taste of the earth, the way that the grapes that grow there taste and how that finds its way into the wine. Tea is exactly the same way. In Chinese, we're not just looking at the minerals in the soil, we're looking at the chA of the place. That's the soil, that's the water, that's the sunlight, the wind, the plants and animals that live around it, everything that is part of that plant's environment, the weather, most of all, are going to be imprinted on the chA, on the structure, the information, the texture of that plant. Then you've got the people. This is super important. The people who grow the tea, the people who pick the tea, the people who process the tea. Do they love the tea? Are they there like basically enslaved, working in a tea plantation somewhere and being exploited? Or do they have agency over the plants that they are harvesting? Do they get to care for them in the way that they see fit? Do they get to harvest from them and from a feeling of being supported and a feeling of generosity and care for the plants? Are they growing those plants with care for them? Are they harvesting them with care for them? Are they processing them with care and respect? That has a huge, huge amount to do. I will maintain, I don't believe in good people and bad people, but I always say, it's in Chinese, people say good people make good tea. And I don't believe that anyone who does not love and respect tea and the place where it grows and the people that they are selling tea to can make good tea. And I've never met anyone who fits that description in my travels in China. The character and the personality of the farmer and the tea master are absolutely there, front and center in the chA of the tea. The fourth one is the process, obviously, right? I mean, I shouldn't say obviously, but we spent all last season talking about the 6 types of tea, and those are separate types because of the processes that we use to make the leaves into tea, the fresh leaves into the finished product of the tea. So you could have a batch of tea leaves and you could divide it into 6 portions, and you could process this portion like green tea, and this like white tea, and this like red tea, and this like chA, ferment this, and all of those different teas that you produce from that same batch, the chA will be different. The plant, the place, and the people will be the same, but the process will be different, and you absolutely will be able to feel the difference in all those processes. Especially, was it roasted with charcoal? Was it smoked? Was it baked? Was it hand processed or machine processed? All those things are going to come to bear very heavily on the chA. Then we have the pour. Those are the first 4, and then the 5th is the pour. The pour, which obviously is the way that I'm pouring the tea right now. Am I present? Am I focused? Am I in the pot with the leaves? Is my mind wandering? Am I distracted by making an episode of a YouTube show? And what's my relationship with this tea? Is my first time having this tea? How deeply do I know this tea? If I've made this tea thousands of times, that's going to come to bear on the way that I pour the tea. And of course, the physical stuff, but really it's that connection that comes to bear on the chA much more than the time and the temperature and the pouring technique, etc. So we have these 5 P's that makes up the chA of tea. And then we have the leaves themselves, which are in the pot. And so what I think is going on is that all of this stored, documented information that the leaves of the plants have accumulated over the course of their life up to the point where that leaf was picked and then processed is in the pot. And my chA is here also when I'm serving the tea. Just like an artist will leave their fingerprints inadvertently on their painting or in their brushstroke, their signature is in the brushstroke. Someone analyzing it to see if it's authentic will say, this brushstroke looks like this person's brushstroke. They're not trying to express themselves through the brushstroke. They're trying to paint a painting, but in the process, they express themselves. And so that's the pour. And that, in essence, for me, is what it is to be good at tea. What it is to be good at pouring tea is not just being able to steep it so that it's got full of flavor and not bitter. It's also being able to be sensitive to the qi of the tea, to feel and experience the qi of the tea, and then to be able to help the tea to express that. So for example, when I teach a class on this, I teach internal Gong Fu Cha is about this subject for tea servers, and then I teach a class called chA, the breath of tea, which is to help people to get to a place where they're experiencing this and to help them understand it better and in more detail. And when I'm teaching my class, I will have people use a worksheet and write things down. When I first started serving tea in the United States, I didn't want to talk about qi because I didn't want to orientalize tea culture. I didn't want to make it this kind of woo-woo, faith healing thing or something like that. And I thought that it sounded too spooky for most Americans to deal with, even though when I was living in China, it was absolutely at the front and center, in Western China especially, of what makes a tea good, what makes a tea valuable. And so I kind of would serve tea and I wouldn't talk about it, and people would come back and they'd be like, I drank this tea and I felt like I was on drugs. And am I on drugs? Am I gonna pass a drug test? Can I drive? Is it okay for me to drive? What is this that I'm feeling? Like, okay, you were tea drunk, cha zui. What you're feeling is cha qi. So the state is cha zui, tea drunk. The substance is cha qi. And so I designed this class and started teaching these classes specifically to help explain this concept to people. And when we do this class, I don't want people to be suggested into feeling something in particular. And so we have this worksheet where all of the students will fill out this worksheet, will drink a tea, we'll go through the worksheet and fill it out, their experiences. And then at the end we share. And the reason that I do it this way is because if you give someone a cup of something and you say, this is gonna make you feel calm, and then they drink it, there's a good chance they're gonna feel calm. It's called the placebo effect, that the suggestion that something's gonna do something will cause that effect in people. So we're very suggestible. What we do in my classes, and what I think is important from if I'm trying to be at all scientific about it, is to make sure that people aren't being influenced one way or the other as to how something's gonna make them feel. And so we write everything down, and then at the end we share. And something that has struck me again and again after doing this for like a decade now, with hundreds of people, is how consistent people's experiences of a given tea will be from one person to another in a single session, and across time, people who have never met and probably will never meet each other, drinking the same tea at different times in different sessions and having remarkably similar experiences, down to very specific and very abstract things. So for example, I've had students who I'll have like 4 or 5 students in a class, and 3 of those students, almost the majority of those students will all describe a given tea as making them think of a meadow. They'll get down to the part where they're talking about these more abstract impressions, and one said, this is a specific reference I'm making to something that actually happened. One said, I feel like I'm a field looking up at the sky, like I am the field and I'm looking up at the sky. Another one said, I had a vision of a horse cart being pulled through a field. Another one said that it feels like they were standing in the middle of a field. And so they all said something to do with a field. And the tea didn't taste like a field or a meadow. It didn't taste like grass. I think it was a red tea. Probably tasted kind of chocolatey and fruity. But they all had this experience. And that happens again and again, where people will have these corroborated experiences without communicating about them. And to me, that speaks to some attribute of the tea that is consistent from time to time to time. It's part of the identity, the personality of that tea. And so I think that, and then when you're making tea, you're taking that into account. Like, for example, here at the tea house, if we're having a party, for example, and we want people to dance, there's going to be certain teas that we'll make. Like you probably heard me mention about ultraviolet, that we like to serve ultraviolet at parties. It's a good party tea. Why? It's not just because of the caffeine. It's because the qi of that tea makes you want to party. And there's teas that I will recommend to people or drink myself when I want to focus on something, when I want to calm down, when I'm feeling distressed and I need emotional healing or I need that emotional succor. Then there are certain teas, and or when I'm pouring tea at a party, for example, it's like being a DJ and deciding what the playlist is going to be. The mood moves throughout the night and then making a tea that's going to match that mood, because when you're serving a tea to a group of people, and that tea has this qi, it is being shared and broadcast out to everyone who's drinking tea together. And so when everyone's drinking that same tea, they're getting aligned under that same vibration, that same feeling, that same personality. I'm gonna drink a little bit of this. And then save this. This is really, it's getting really, really thick and good right now. So that's why I like to, this is a very nuanced explanation. You really have to go into kind of a lot of detail to make heads or tails of what this concept is, because for Chinese people, the concept of qi is so deeply baked into their worldview, they might not even think of it or use the word, but the way that they live their lives is heavily informed by it. For example, Chinese people, when I was in China, people would always be like, oh, I'm shanghuo, I can't eat this. I'm not gonna eat meat right now because I'm shanghuo. They're not saying they're becoming vegetarian. They're saying that their constitution right now is too hot. Shanghuo means on fire. And so it means, what does it mean? They're breaking out, their lips are dry, they've got redness or like inflammation, and they've got too much fire in their body. And that's not real literal fire, that's hot qi. And so they'll avoid heating foods and seek out cooling foods. And that's just how Chinese people live their lives. The weather is qi, tian qi, the breath of heaven. That's how you say weather. Or buke qi is how you say you're welcome. It means don't have the qi of a guest. And so for Chinese people, when they're drinking tea, just like anything else, this sensitivity and awareness is there. But for us, we don't necessarily, we in the West don't grow up with this concept. It's not so ingrained. And so when I'm talking about qi, I want to have a very nuanced explanation, because I don't want people to run away with it and think that it's like some kind of sci-fi thing or super woo-woo thing. But I also want people to understand that it is absolutely what makes tea what it is. It's why people drink tea. It's why it's the most widely drunk beverage in the world. If you just wanted caffeine, coffee would be the most widely consumed beverage in the world. Whether people know it or not, whether your English grandma is thinking about the qi of the tea that she is drinking, she does know that she craves it and that she wants it and that she feels much, much better after she has her cup of tea. And what I like about tea is that it is so subtle. It doesn't need to be loud and out there with the way that it makes you feel, but it's powerful and it is comprehensive. When you're serving tea to a group of people, it completely wells up and saturates the feeling of what is going on. And that's what makes tea such a magical thing. Thank you all for joining us. We're looking forward to the rest of season 3. My name is Sohan, and I will see you next time.